All right, you guys, we are going to start by looking at the student samples for this project. So as I mentioned the other day, we're going to be doing a self-portrait illustration. So you are going to either take a photo of yourself or bring in an image of yourself. And on top of that photograph, you're going to be using nothing but the pen tool to trace over the highlights and lowlights and color blocked areas of your face. And what will end up happening is by the time you're finished, it's going to look like you. I give you a lot of previous student examples for this project, and the reason I do that is because I want you to see just how successful this project is, not just for the top students in my class, but for a majority of the students in my class. I want to give you that hope and encouragement that your projects are going to look as good as these samples do. Oftentimes, I'll use my son as my example, so you'll see him a few different times as he gets older. And then you'll just continue to see other student samples as well. So to start off today, I'm going to have all of us just take a photograph of ourselves to use as practice. Tomorrow, you're welcome to either retake this image of yourself, use the image you took today, or bring in another photo to use instead. If you choose to bring in a different photo, I'm just going to remind you that it cannot be a filtered image. So don't take this photo with Snapchat or apply like a really intense filter on top of it. You want to be able to have those variations in your skin tone, the highlights and the lowlights, because that will give you something to trace around. If you use a filter, it tends to wash out those highlights and lowlights, gives you that flawless looking skin, but it also doesn't give you a whole lot to trace around. So you'll end up having a more flat and less detailed version of your self-portrait, and it will actually make it harder for you to do the project. So just let it be a natural, unfiltered photo. Even if the image itself isn't your favorite, when you're done doing the project, it'll look really cool. I promise. Okay, so we'll come back here. I have included a short video, and it's not really short, it's 18 minutes, but it's not a tutorial. You really just watch this person create the self-portrait using their photo. So if you were to have this playing off to the side and you could kind of see how this person approaches the various elements of their face, whether it's their eyes, their nose, their mouth, it's a nice quick reference. You'll also be able to obviously re-reference this, at least to get started with the project. So the first thing we need to do is open up Illustrator. And we're going to create a document. And we'll go ahead and create an 8.5 by 11 inch document. So I'll click New File. And then over in my preset details, I'm going to make sure my dimensions are set to inches. And then my width can be 11 and my height can be 8.5. We'll make it landscape just because as we take our practice picture today, it will be landscape.
Where is it at? Because yours not recent. We have our recent.
It doesn't matter. It should, when you create a new file, you should just be able to see on the left-hand side preset details. Or you can go to mobile or web and have.
Okay.
I just put it in on my own. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll click create. Now, there's a 100% chance that your photo is not going to be in 8.5 by 11 inch dimensions, which means when you go to resize your image, whether it's shrinking it down or making it larger, you're going to have the photo either bleed off the edge or not fill the space perfectly. And that's okay. What you're not going to end up doing is stretching or squishing your photo to fit. Okay, this is just the artboard. As we know, things can hang off the edge and it's not a problem. So now we either need to place an image that already exists or take a photograph of ourselves just to use for right now. So if we come to the bottom of our computer and where it says type here to search, just type in camera. You can then open the camera app. And when you're ready, you can smile and take a photo. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the light so it's brighter in here. Your camera should be well lit. I know mine never seems to be, which is why I'll end up using a different image, but I'll go ahead and say cheese. Then I can close out of camera, come back into my Illustrator project. Now to find that image you just took, if you took it here in class, when you come up to File, Place, along the left-hand side, you should see Pictures. Mine's in a couple of spots. And under Camera Roll, you should see your most recently taken photographs. Here's one I took from last year. And notice it hangs off the edge of the artboard. It's bigger. So if I resize it, I'm going to hold down Shift and resize it in proportion. Again, it's okay if part of it hangs off the edge of the artboard. Because my photographs from my computer always end up really dark, I'm actually going to use a different photo. So I'm just going to choose one from my desktop. If this is you because you're bringing in your own photo, go into your downloads or wherever you have that file saved. This one comes in smaller, so I'm going to resize it larger. And again, I'm not going to try and make it fill my 8.5 by 11. Otherwise, it's going to deform my face, right? We don't want to do that. Keep it in proportion. The next thing we need to do is turn this photograph into a template layer so that we can actually use it and then trace on top of it in a new layer. So I'm going to come down to my layers. If you don't see your layers, you might just need to expand your toolbar over there. Find your layer 1, and then in the empty space next to the words layer 1, double click. Your layer options dialog box comes up. And we're going to go ahead and click on template. And we're going to uncheck dim images and click OK. And we know it's a template layer now because the eyeball icon disappeared and now it's just that little rectangle. And it's also a locked layer. Please leave it locked. Don't unlock it and try and add things into it unless you're just changing out your reference image. Keep it locked. We're going to add a new layer on top. So I'm going to come to the bottom of my layer panel and click the plus sign to create a new layer. Now I have layer 2 on top. I'm actually going to change the name of it to Draw Here. That way I know this is the layer I'm going to put art into.
Can you do the layer code again? Where you don't pick the layer to see it.
Bottom right corner. Little plus sign.
Oh, okay. Oh.
Cool. The next thing I'm going to do is open up a new library of swatches called Skin Tones. So I'm going to come to my Swatches tab. And in the bottom left corner, there's a little icon for swatch libraries. It just looks like library books. And when you click on it, you see all these different swatch library titles. They're alphabetical. So just come to where you see Skin Tones and click. Now, how you're going to use the skin tone swatches is you're going to choose one row that most closely matches your skin tone. Will it be perfect? No. But once your project is finished, you're really not going to notice the difference. You're going to be using either the first, second, fourth, or seventh row. The other ones are going to end up being too dark no matter what your skin tone is. Okay. I'm going to go with the first one. So if you actually click on the little folder next to the row that you're going to use, and then come back to your swatches, tab, it actually adds that row. What you don't want to use is all of those swatches and click all around, because you'll end up looking like a patchwork quilt. You want to keep it consistent so you're always using the same base skin tone and then the same highlights and lowlights. If you chose a row that has 5 color swatches, the middle swatch will be your base color. And then you'll have 2 highlights to choose from and 2 lowlights or shadows to choose from. If you ended up choosing a row that has 6 color swatches, based on your base skin tone, you can choose either the 3rd or the 4th swatch. And then you'll either have 3 highlights and 2 lowlights, or 3 lowlights and 2 highlights. Now I'm going to come over to my pen tool, scroll down to my swatches, and make sure that I have a swatch fill with my base skin tone and no stroke, because there are no outlines on our faces. So make sure there is no color in the stroke swatch, only the fill. And now I'm going to begin. When I start, I'm actually going to do my entire face and neck and ears. If you think of this like you are doing a construction paper version of your self-portrait, starting with the piece of paper that needs to be in the background, we would have to do our entire head and neck. Because on top of that, we'd be able to cut out our eyes and our nostrils and our lips and so forth, right? Now, because we're going to do hair towards the very end of this project, I'm actually going to start tracing around my head, but in the section that has my hair, so that when I place the hair over my face, it beautifully overlaps. I don't want to try and match those 2 lines up perfectly. So it might look weird at first, but that's okay. And I'll go ahead and include my neck. And again, anywhere my shirt is overlapping, I don't actually need to do a perfect job, because my shirt will overlap that skin when I do the shirt. Now, I've come to a place where I can no longer see the edge of my face. This is why we've created a template layer to begin with. Because when I hit Control Y, it goes into outline mode. Nothing has disappeared. I'm only just seeing the edge of my line and not the fill color at this moment. So I can continue tracing around the edge of the face. And again, now that I'm back in the hair, it doesn't really matter. Once I close my line up, my entire shape is enclosed. I'm going to hit Control Y and just confirm that I've successfully traced around the outer edge of my face and head. Hit Control Y, zoom in, and now I'm going to do my eye. I like to start with one of my eyes first because it's something that's easy to begin with, and it's also very recognizable. As we move forward through this project, we're going to be focusing our attention more so on the highlights and lowlights that we see on our skin, because that's what's going to give our face shape. Everywhere we have highlights, that part of our face is usually coming forward. And everywhere we see lowlights or shadows, like our nostrils, sides of our noses, our smile lines, that's because our skin is going backwards. Dark things look as though they're going backwards. Light things look as though they're coming forward. And so when we start finding these color areas, these blobs of highlights and lowlights, and tracing over them, it's going to make the shape of our face. But it's nice to have something recognizable to start with. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my eye. And I'm going to start with the white of the eye because that's the part of my eyeball that's the furthest back. Again, if I was making this out of construction paper, I would probably want to do the entire almond shape of the white of my eye rather than the two separate little triangles, because then I'd have to match it up perfectly with the iris, and that would be weird. So I'm going to take my pen tool. I might actually just choose white from my swatches. Come in, and I will start tracing around the outer edge of the white of my eye. Oops. I'll hit Control Y and check in, and I accidentally had my face selected at the time as well, so it turned white. So I'll just go back and select that and give it my base color again. And so that I don't accidentally move that base around as I'm adding other elements on top, if I have just my face, neck, ear section selected and I hit Control 2, it will lock that element in place. I can unlock it down the road, but for now, it's not going to accidentally get moved around. So now I'll zoom back into my eye. I'm going to hit Control Y because I need to continue tracing. So I have the white of my eye. Now I'm going to work on the iris. So I'll take my pen tool. Maybe actually I'll start by taking my eyedropper tool and grabbing one of the colors from one of the pixel colors for my eye. And then I'll go back to the pen tool. Check it. I can always use my white arrow if something isn't quite lining up correctly. But there'll be so much layering that it's probably fine. Control Y. I'm going to come in and do the pupil of my eye, make it black. But I have a lot of highlights, so I'm also going to trace around some of those. And I'll take my eyedropper and pick one of those highlight colors. I can always come back in and do more detail down the road if I want, especially since my particular eye color has that dark, dark blue edge around it. I can go in and add that to it. But the next thing I'm going to do are my eyelashes, and for me, eyeliner. Now, except for a few rare circumstances, most of you will not be able to see your individual eyelashes. Instead, it's going to end up showing up like this, just a dark portion above your eye. And that's probably what you're going to need to trace, okay? Don't try and make eyelashes if you don't see individual lashes. Does that make sense? It won't end up looking the way you want it to. So for me, I'm just going to come through and start tracing around this outer edge. I'm going to go ahead and do this as the upper eyelid and lash, and then I'll come back in and do the lower. Take my eyedropper and grab one of the colors that I see, and then I'll come in and check it. And so when I zoom out, you can tell that that's where my eyelashes and eyeliner were without having to necessarily see the lash separations themselves. And when you zoom in, it looks kind of funky, but when you zoom out, you can see that it's starting to look more natural, right? I'll come back in, and now I'll do the bottom lashes. And you're going to find that there's a lot of overlapping colors as you're doing this project, and that's okay. And because we're human and we don't have definitive edges anywhere on our faces, you are going to have to decide where to start and stop the color blocks that you're tracing in certain circumstances, right? Sometimes it'll be more, sometimes it'll be less. I'll come in here now and I'll kind of make some adjustments with the white arrow. Smooth some of this out. Okay. I'll come in and do this highlight. And if you really look, it almost has like a forked quality to it. So I'm really going to try and trace over just where it's a bit lighter. And then since this is more of a skin tone, I'm going to come back to my skin tone row. I'm going to grab not maybe the lightest highlight, but the one right next to my base skin tone and see how that looks. That looks pretty good. I zoom out. I'll come in and do my eyebrow. It'll help give my eye its shape. Actually going to come in and adjust this anchor point. Round it out a bit. Use my eyedropper to choose a color. And so as you continue to find the highlights and the lowlights, trace over them. Your face will start to take shape. What you're looking for are blobs of color. I'm gonna make this a low light. And I'll send it backwards. Remember, control left and right bracket key will bring things forward and backward. Some eyeshadow here, so I'm going to include that. Use the eyedropper tool for this. And send it back. Slowly but surely, this eye is beginning to come together. And as we move forward, we'll continue to talk about grabbing areas of color, highlights, like this. Low light areas. And if ever you have a highlight or a low light that's either too light or too dark for your preference, you can also select it and lower the opacity, making it a more subtle highlight or low light if you need to. And as you start this process for the first several days, it's not going to necessarily look normal or correct because you're literally tracing over blobs of color. It isn't until you have enough of those blobs traced where it's going to start to come together and look like you. And we'll go into a little more detail about this as we continue working on this project, but things like your nose are not just a black outline in the shape of what you imagine your nose to be. We'll just slowly start chipping away at highlights and lowlights. So right now, as you can see, it doesn't look like me yet. But if you were to give me a few days, it'll start to evolve. Okay. Before you leave on the first day that you start this project and it's the project you want to continue with, don't forget to save it as an AI file so that you can come back to it and keep working on it.